I like Transformers. It should be no surprise to anyone who knows me that I like Transformers.
I would like to thank my friend Soundwave from Transformers for this awesome moment.
There are a lot of things that I like about Transformers, mainly the character designs and the stories that the franchise tell. Even some of the shows that are outside the original Generation 1 cartoon are heralded for being home to some of the greatest stories that the franchise has ever told. So you can understand my disappointment when the Michael Bay movies barely have any of that. These movies are infamous for being absolutely terrible, the bottom of the barrel of cinema. And I took about 12 hours watching all of them so I could talk about each one, because there are some elements that I like in some of the movies. So let's start with the first one, and the first one is actually one of the better ones. A 2007 movie simply called Transformers.
Boobies. Take your prune juice! Take your prune juice! Take your prune juice! Shut up!
When Transformers 2007 released, it was a technical marvel. I mean, it was released alongside such incredible films as Epic Movie and The Water Horse, so needless to say there was some tough competition. Even though the Transformers looked spectacular from a technical standpoint, you could barely tell what was going on in some of the action scenes. They barely resemble any other incarnations of the characters, alongside from Optimus and Bumblebee, and maybe Jazz? But let's be honest. Who gives a shit about Jazz? Not the movie. Not to mention the fact that the Transformers, the characters that the movie is named after, are barely in the movie. I'm not kidding when I say they show up at the halfway point. They are barely in the movie before then. Most of the film's runtime is dedicated to our human characters, which are serviceable at best. They're not great, but they're not god-awful. Though I will be honest, the director seems to linger on some scenes with our main characters. For the first hour of the movie, only 2 Transformers actually kinda show up. And at the halfway point, when all the other Transformers show up, it feels like a completely different movie than the other hour. And it's a pretty subpar movie at that. We don't even see our main villain in action until the last third of the movie. Not to mention the fact that the main villain looks almost identical to all of his minions, except for one. But I guess that's some brand unification for you, I guess. Why do they all look the same? I'm honestly struggling to try and think of things to say about this movie. It's just kind of okay. Not particularly something I would rent again to watch, but maybe if it was on TV, I'd probably watch it again. Not a great movie, but certainly not terrible.
Stop lubricating the man.
I am directly below.
Revenge of the Fallen is the point where everything in these movies takes a giant nosedive. But before we get into that, here's a little bit of trivia about the behind the scenes of this movie. This film was being made during the 2008 to 2009 writer's strike, so many films, this film included, wasn't being properly written for by many writers. Not to mention the fact that director Michael Bay had already begun shooting many shots for this film before there was even a cohesive script to go off of. If that doesn't sound like a good movie, then I don't know what does. This movie also began the trend of Transformers being shoehorned into actual historical events. Why? Because fuck you, this is Transformers Revenge of the Fallen, and the pyramid is apparently a giant laser meant to drain the sun, made by this guy called the Fallen, because he fell down the stairs, I guess. In this movie, almost every character that was in the last movie is portrayed as being so overly extravagant and cartoonish that it almost hurts. Not to mention the fact that when the film can't think of where to progress from that point, they just send everyone to Egypt and say, hey, we're in Egypt now! Oh, and also they brought back Megatron. This movie is just one big mess of everything being crammed together and hoping it works. And the fact that it doesn't get any better after this point sickens me. But before we go on...
Soundwave acknowledges.
Fuck you! You're not Soundwave! Soundwave doesn't have those little insect teeth! He doesn't shoot out little balls into the atmosphere! Who the fuck are you? Look how they massacred my boy. Dark of the Moon is very dark and very Moon. Right off the bat, this movie is another contender for the trend of Transformers being shoehorned into historical events. Why? Because fuck you! This is Transformers Dark of the Moon! Except this time, instead of pyramids, it's the space race!
Just a storm, Dick.
With the reason they went to the moon being because a Transformers ship crashed there! And they've kept it a secret for nearly 42 years! Weren't the Transformers supposed to be first showing up in 2007? Why are all these Transformers just here on Earth for hundreds of years? And on that ship, there's this guy called Sentinel Prime, who is red. That is all I have to say about Sentinel Prime.
In a world I do not know, I am no longer your teacher, Optimus. You are mine.
Wow. That's actually a really good moment for character development. Thank you, Sentinel! Oh. Yeah, so Sentinel ends up being the main villain of the movie and betrays the Autobots and eventually brings the entirety of the planet Cybertron to Earth. Ain't that just lovely? Oh, and also they brought back Megatron. You better! To me, this movie does not feel like a movie made by people. It feels like it was made by an AI program, not to be a good movie, but to be the perfect summer blockbuster. And yep, it worked. You know what? This wasn't a movie. I'm not going to call it a movie. This was a test, an experiment for them to churn out as many Transformers sequels as possible. And looking at the box office earnings, it was a success. Sure, they didn't even make a good fucking movie, but it made money. That's the moral of the story, everyone. They all made money. I'm tired of this. What's next? Age of Extinction? Okay, please shoot me now.
Mr. Squidward, I should kick your fucking ass!
Age of Extinction broke me. This movie is so terrible that it broke me. I watched this with a semi-open mind. Maybe it won't be as bad as people say it is. No! It's horrendously terrible. It's just as bad as the second movie. But at least the second movie had a semi-excuse as to why it was so bad. This movie is just full of contrivances. So we have this military guy who is hunting down Transformers because of the last movie, yet he is working alongside a Transformer to hunt them. And he is also helping this one company to make their own Transformers. Like, do you hate Transformers or not? Just pick one. Pick one! Not to mention the fact that the Transformer helping the military wants to find Optimus Prime, because him being with the humans upsets the cosmic balance, which is somewhat understandable and actually sounds like a pretty interesting presence. But once he gets Optimus, he gives the humans a bomb that will turn their planet into Cybertron metal. Wouldn't that upset the cosmic balance as well? One thing I kinda wanna bring up was the side plot with the main guy's daughter being 17 and her boyfriend being 20. The actress herself was not 17 when they made the film, but apparently it was a directorial decision. Michael Bay, what the fuck is wrong with you? Oh, and also, this movie is another contender for the trend of Transformers being shoehorned into historical events. Why? Because fuck you! This is Transformers! Age of Extinction! Except this time, it's just dinosaurs. Transformers are dinosaurs now! Though if I'm being honest, at least the writers kind of did their homework with this one. I don't mind this one as much as the other ones because at least this had something to do with the original Transformers because of the Dinobots. They were an actual thing in Transformers history. I like Slag. Slag is cool. But the way that their origin is done in this movie isn't as good as many of the others. Like in the comics, the Dinobots were a group of Autobots that crash-landed on Earth and took the form of dinosaurs. But in this movie, apparently the meteor that killed the dinosaurs was the same bomb that turns the world into Cybertron metal. Huh? At this point in the movies, all of the Autobots from the first movie are dead, except for Optimus and Bumblebee. But we all know why that is. So to replace such characters as a committed soldier willing to fight for a cause he believed in, a field medic who cared for the Autobots around him, but he barely had any dialogue, so it was kinda hard to tell, and a lieutenant who cared for the well-being and safety of his soldiers, Now we have a samurai, John Goodman, and Green Man. Truly the pinnacle of grand warriors.
Oh, and also they brought
The last night was actually kind of forgettable. From what I remember from the movie, it didn't feel like a Transformers movie. It felt like a movie solely about King Arthur, and then they just awkwardly shoehorn in Transformers characters. And speaking of shoehorning, this movie is another contender for the trend of Transformers being shoehorned into actual historical events. Why? Because fuck! This time they just go all out with it, saying that apparently Transformers have been on Earth forever. Medieval times, World War II, the discovery of America or some shit. You name it, they were there apparently. And apparently the Transformers that arrived on Earth in 2007 were on Earth for a lot longer than 2007, so... What? Also, apparently, the main guy from the first movie is a criminal again, even though I'm assuming he got his name cleared at the end of the fourth movie. But I guess he's a criminal again because they forgot that the fourth movie happened, except that they remembered that the fourth movie happened. Like, did it happen or not? Just, does it carry over from the last film or not? Pick one, Michael Bay. Pick one! There are also apparently some Decepticon characters that showed up during the Suicide Squad kind of scene, but really raises the question, if they were hunting Transformers in the last movie, why would they kill the Autobots, yet put Decepticons in containment? I'm sensing a bit of biasty here, and much like Optimus's new team, these Decepticons have no resemblance of being an actual team, and are rather just a group of gangsters or something like that. And speaking of Optimus, he's barely in this movie. The poster child of the movie is barely in this movie. The movie is sold on the fight between Optimus and Bumblebee, but even then, the fight is just nothing. They sold this movie on nothing! The evil Optimus in this movie, or, Nemesis Prime, isn't really that different from the regular Optimus in these movies. Some versions of Optimus Prime are a lot different than the main Optimus in the Generation 1 cartoon, but they all have same core traits that connect them all together. Animated Optimus is a lot more of a naive leader. But the two of them have a really strong moral code that really helps them become a real leader of the Autobots. That's why people like Optimus as a character, because he's a good moral leader. This Optimus will just kill anyone with no questions asked, and he has!
No, Optimus!
And even before you have a chance of processing what the hell is going on in the finale for this movie, it just ends. It just abruptly ends. Oh, did I forget to mention that Unicron was in this movie? You know, Unicron, the planet-sized Transformer, the chaos bringer of the Transformers universe. They tease him through the movie like, oh, he's gonna be a big part in this movie, and they never do anything with it. But before you have a chance to question it, it's all over. The movies are over. These movies started on a relatively alright note, but slowly but surely they sunk deeper and deeper, to the point where these films didn't end on a high note. It ended on a whimper. What sucks is that considering the success of these movies, this is what Transformers is to the majority of people. Whenever someone thinks of the Transformers franchise, they're not going to think of the wonderful stories of Transformers Prime or the likable characters from Transformers Animated. They're going to think of these dog water excuses for entertainment. But with The Last Night being the least profitable of all of the movies, it seemed to put a cap on this terrible franchise for good. But then Bumblebee came around and fixed everything! Look what they did to my boy Soundwave. They did him justice.